Yeah, we'll start with the battle for Old Trafford. Hot's up with increased bids. Miguel, where do we stand at the moment then? There was a deadline that we all got very excited about. We know we love a deadline on Sky Sports News. And then it's passed with the two main bidders apparently not lodging their bids just yet.
Yeah, first broken by Cave, it should be said. And since then, the various parties have confirmed it, that both Qatar and Ineos have asked for extensions. Now, there is some feeling, it seems, the bids could go in tomorrow. But it must be said, like talking to a few industry figures and that already, it's caused a few ripples and surprises. It might be something simple. I suppose there is this wider concern that the Glazers may not actually sell, and they're seeking they're seeking funding. But certainly, like the expectation was right up to 9 p.m. that both bids would go in. Like, all day we're having people who are representing the two parties saying that would be the case, and it hasn't happened. So another twist in this highly controversial and convoluted story.
Absolutely. David, what's your read into it then? Because as we understand, Kaveh Solokol, our chief reporter, has said that between 5 and 8 bids have been lodged with the Rain Group in New York, but not the one from Sheikh, Jassim or Sir Jim Ratcliffe's Ineos. How do you see this unfolding then? If you have lodged a bid, you'd be pretty frustrated with it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, the perils of PR, because it's clear that the two public camps were giving off messages that might not have been entirely accurate. That's one of the hazards of a takeover process, and certainly the reporting of it, which isn't easy at all. We're hearing that a number of bids have been received by Rain Group, the Merchant Bank of New York, just not these two. And so the extensions appear to have been granted, and presumably they'll get these bids in as soon as possible, most likely tomorrow, and then there'll be a period where it will all be assessed. But one thing it perhaps underlines is that there is more to this than meets the eye, because there have been suggestions of maybe 10 bidders or 8 bidders of various descriptions, some for a full takeover, some for partial investment, some to help finance investment or indeed the Glazers staying. And the indications are that this probably has a bit longer to run, and we just need to be a bit careful about getting carried away just because 2 bids may be more in the public eye than others.
Yeah, it's an opaque situation regarding the other bids, isn't it, Miguel, which we're waiting for clarity on that. Let's get to your piece, though, in The Independent. Pretty hard-hitting headline, to say the least. Greed has brought football to the brink of implosion. Now the entire structure could collapse, and this is connected with one bidder in particular. Manchester United's potential takeover by Qatar could be the fault line that sparks a, quote, big short moment for the sport. Miguel, could you talk us through the piece?
I mean, it's a heavy one. It's something I've discussed on the show in the past, but it also feels like a Qatari takeover of Manchester United. And again, let's be under no illusions here. It's not a private bid. It will be a state bid. I said this on Sunday, but if anyone believes it's a private bid, I've got some magic beans to sell them. But it does feel like that a Qatari takeover of Manchester United, who are probably maybe the grandest institution in English football, bar Liverpool, one of the biggest clubs in the world, bar Real Madrid or Barcelona, for them to be taken over by a state and used for political purposes in that way, for sports washing, it does feel like it would bring the game to a new level, into a new era, but one that's, of course, been built. I mean, we're at a point where, and this is the argument I'm making in the piece, where football has never been so globally popular. Even in America, I write this kind of talk about how the expectation is after the 2026 World Cup, it could become the dominant sport. But just as it reaches this point where it's this kind of global cultural monolith, there's all these sort of fault lines built into it. Among them, the amount of money in it, which has caused this size, and the stretch that has in the game. We've talked about how the resource gap and the attempt to kind of always get to the next level causes increase in wages, which puts club under threat. That's one of the reasons we've had the white paper. It's attracted all sorts of interest into the game, like nation states, sovereign wealth funds, also private equity, which shouldn't go unmentioned as well. And to add to this, and this is something that's also been discussed in the show in the last few weeks, it feels like there's a bit of a failure of governance to deal with anything. The only solution to anything seems to be to add more games. That's always it, because games bring revenue. But all that does is just increase the size of the gap, because it's those at the top end that invariably get more. And it does feel like we're at a point now where something eventually has to give. The Super League was arguably a warning, given how it brought so many strands together. But I mean, the product at the top end of the game has never been better, but the health of the wider game has arguably never been worse. I know it's quite a weighty theme, but
yeah,
it brings a lot of this together.
We should say that the bid from Qatar would dispute the fact that it is a state sort of sanctioned bid and that it's a separate entity. Other people would say that for balance. But David, what is your take on Miguel's point widely about the contrast between the wealth at the tip of the football pyramid and the problems elsewhere? How do you see that? We're talking about issues potentially at Sheffield United at the moment, aren't we?
It's getting bigger, the disparity. And when you look at the sort of wealth involved potentially in this situation existing at Paris Saint-Germain, Newcastle United, Manchester City and others, it does prompt cause for concern. And that's why there's a lot of deliberation at the moment. The new deal for football, which is being discussed by the Premier League, the distribution of funds, the government white paper, which is timely in all of this. And let's see if and when it actually comes about and what sort of teeth it has in the situation. It was interesting, I think in one of Miguel's other excellent pieces earlier this week, he was pointing to the fact that this proposed bid by Sheikh Jassim is trying to show a more restrained level of spending, that they don't want to blow Manchester United, the Glazers, out of the water just to get hold of it at any expense. They want to show themselves to be responsible investors who think about these things a bit more carefully and are not being presented as having more money than sense. But either way, we're talking eye-watering figures, world record bids, and therefore, you know, there has to be some serious consideration on behalf of Premier League, on behalf of the Football Association, and somebody needs to get a grip of this. You know, it's fresh in the memory still for me and Migs. Certainly, we reported on it, cases like Bury going out of business, and I think there'll be a lot of clubs further down the pyramid who are looking at this sort of conversation and the numbers being bandied around and sort of thinking, what about us and when will this be sorted out? Can we ever not even reach where the sort of levels that they're at, but even climb the ladder? And this, they're under existential threat, many of these clubs, and they'll want to see some real movement in how they can survive.
Yeah, Miguel, the piece...
Just on that.
You come in, Miguel.
So there's a key point made by the human rights research group Fair Square last week, where they wrote out to the government about this exact issue and pointed to what is actually an inherent flaw in the otherwise widely praised white paper. So the white paper, its fundamental premise is supposed to protect the stability of the game, particularly in terms of kind of the financial structure. But it makes no mention of state bids. And the argument from Fair Square is that how can you actually ever maintain this financial stability and this sort of structure if at the very top of it you have states owning clubs? I mean, the story I've written in The Independent repeatedly is that if you look at, say, Qatari ownership of Paris Saint-Germain, well, one of the reasons or one of the motivations that I was told behind the Neymar transfer was not just to bring him to the club, but also because they knew at that sort of price and at those sort of wages, they would be so inflating the market that only a handful of clubs would be able to keep up. And that's pretty much what's happened. I mean, the kind of pursuit against that has always brought Barcelona almost to the brink of ruin. Not that Barcelona should be absolved, of course. Yeah. But
well, Miguel, you used the word Big Short, which obviously a reference to 2008 financial crisis, and a lot of people's minds will evoke memories of that. Are you saying substantially as well that the numbers here, and the Guardian reports this, Kaveh Solokol, our chief reporter, is reporting this, that the initial bids for Manchester United, not the most recent ones, were £4.5 billion in that range? Do you feel that the business of football does not substantiate the numbers involved, in that there isn't the custom to underpin it? It's similar to 2008, that people weren't able to pay mortgages.
And the issue really is, I mean, ultimately clubs like Manchester United, say top 10, 12 clubs, no matter what happens to the rest of football, they're going to be insulated, they're going to be protected. And that is even seen from the fact that, I mean, it's been widely reported now, the actual true value of Manchester United may be as low as 2.5 billion. But of course, the Glazers, if they sell now, they could be getting over 5 billion. So they're going to be insulated. The top end will be fine. It's the rest of the game where, and also this is illustrated by the fact that, I mean, in part, the global strength of the Premier League shows this, because it's become this usually glossy model that everyone wants to be involved with, everyone wants to watch, and that's actually increasingly at the expense of other leagues around the world. And while it's great for the Premier League because it's become a super league in its own right, it's not necessarily good for the wider structure of what is a global game.
Mm-hmm. David, any thoughts to add before we head to a break there on the ownership situation at Manchester United or across the board?
No, I think Mig sums it up perfectly there. And I think there will be, some real concern when we're talking at these levels. Inside the Premier League, Richard Masters, their chief executive, these negotiations are aimed at trying to create a fairer playing field, a healthier game. And when we talk in this sense, it looks like it could have the opposite impact if it isn't managed properly. And it's a big job for the likes of Masters, the FA, Mark Bullingham, to be able to take this on and actually, negotiate between these clubs as to how they are going to ensure that trickle-down benefits the smaller, less wealthy clubs. And it's going to be a very difficult prospect with so many different priorities at different levels of the game. And those discrepancies and disparities are only widening. It may be glamorous on the surface to a lot of supporters of these clubs who are being taken over, but there are fundamental issues underneath.